You're age 64 with $2 million saved. Can you retire? There are three key reasons that prevent most people or most families in the United States from retiring just a little bit earlier or a lot earlier than the average couple. For starts, we're not eligible to receive or begin receiving our Social Security benefits until somewhere between the ages 66 and 67, depending on when we were born. And retiring before then requires a great deal of stress to be put on your financial assets during the years that you're not receiving those benefits. The second reason is that we're living longer. It's more likely than not that at least one spouse will still be living in their mid-90s. That's a greater than a 50% chance. The longer that you live, of course, the more money that you need to sustain your lifestyle. And finally, because it takes a lot of money to produce a little income in a sustainable way. In this video, I'm going to run through a case study of a married couple, both the age of 64 with $2 million saved, and explain why they can retire. And I'll also walk you through the specific challenges that they'll face and the impact of working even 1 or 2 years longer can have on reducing their risk. Hi everybody, my name is Michael Carbone. I'm a financial planner and a money manager in the greater Boston area, and I'm here to teach you how to put the odds of long-term financial success in your favor. Real quick before I get started, if you find this video to be helpful, then subscribe to the channel. The more people that engage with these videos, the more likely it is that YouTube will put it in front of somebody that needs to see it. Anyway, so let's get to it. So we have our couple, John and Jane Doe, ages 64 and 64 respectively. They have one child, Jimmy, who is the age of 33, and John and Jane would like to retire now, which would be slightly earlier than what would be considered to be normal in the United States. All right, for assets, they have roughly $800,000 in non-qualified accounts. That would be anything that's held outside of a retirement account that's not tax deferred. They have roughly $1.2 million between each spouse in 401ks and individual retirement accounts or IRAs. So for a total of liquid financial savings of around $2 million. They also own a primary residence, their home. It's worth around $600,000. They have a small mortgage of around $57,000 left over. So their total net worth is roughly $2.5 million. But of that $2.5 million, they have roughly $2 million that they have that's sort of dedicated to funding their retirement spending and their retirement goals. All right, so now that we know how much money they have saved and how much is available to draw from to support their spending needs in retirement, the next step is to understand their cash flow, and this is arguably the most important step of the process. Everything in retirement planning can be boiled down to cash flow, and I know that that word cash flow is kind of vernacularly to make up a word, but it's pretty simple, and here's what it means. The word cash flow in the retirement planning context is simply the amount of cash or income that you have that's available after receiving your Social Security, receiving any part-time wages or anything like that that's income coming through your household, and then paying taxes on that income, and then paying for your living expenditures that you need to meet for your spending needs. If there is cash that's left over after all of that, then your cash flow is positive. That cash is then added back to your assets. If it's negative, if there's a deficit and you need more income to spend, then your cash flow is negative, and that's what you're pulling from your portfolio in retirement. And so most retirees, their cash flow is negative because they no longer have wages. So all retirement planning really is you're projecting out your future cash flow and saying if there's a deficit, which most people will have, if you need more cash, then how much do you need to pull from your portfolio, right? And then your portfolio is invested and it's growing and so on and so forth. But based on how much cash that you're going to need from your portfolio, how much stress that you have to put on your assets, what is the likelihood that you'll run out of money or exhaust your savings during your lifetime? All right, so let's take a look at their cash flow, and we'll start with the income side of the equation, the inflows. So as you can see, at the age of 65, Jane has a pension that is worth $20,000 a year. There is no cost of living adjustment. There's no inflation protection, as is the case with the vast majority of pensions, defined benefit plans in the United States. So she has $20,000 that is recurring and coming through to their household for the rest of her life. There's a full survivor benefit on that pension, so they can both feel comfortable in knowing that there's a baseline of $20,000 of income that's coming through their household. It's important to note that the $20,000 not having that inflation protection, the buying power of those dollars will become, it will deteriorate over time. So in 20 years, that same $20,000 of income will buy, roughly half of the same amount of goods and services that it would have when it started. So they have $20,000 that's beginning next year. For Social Security income, they have a filing strategy that they've determined is the most appropriate based on their goals. So to give you some background to how they arrived at this Social Security filing strategy is Jane has a Social Security full retirement or primary insurance amount benefit. So her full benefit is slightly less than John. So what they've decided is for Jane to take her full retirement age Social Security benefit at the age of 67, and John will earn those delayed credits by waiting until he's 70 so that they have a higher base of income to rely upon, over time. And the value of Social Security is really important too because it has that inflation protection. The Social Security benefits will rise to, hopefully keep up with the cost of living over time. And the reason why they decided to delay John's Social Security as opposed to Jane's is that John has the higher benefits, so there's a little bit more, value in delaying. And if John were to predecease Jane, then that gives Jane that protection because she would then inherit the higher of the two benefits. So it's just a strategy that's trying to maximize the total, income that's collected from Social Security over each of their lifetimes. So starting at the age of 65, they have $20,000, and then starting at the age of 67, they have roughly $51,000, and then by the time that John reaches the age of 70, their income jumps up substantially to around $111,000. All right, so let's take a look at their outflows. So John and Jane are spending roughly $150,000, barring any taxes or income taxes that they're paying. And this also includes a mortgage, which has a principal and interest payment of around $30,000 a year annually. That mortgage will be paid off in full by the year 2026. So in 2026, their total expenditures, barring any taxes, again, will be roughly $130,000 in today's dollars, and their expenditures will be rising by roughly 3% a year annually due to the rising prices of goods and services from inflation. We're assuming 3%. That may be towards the high end. The long-term trend is around 2%, but we want to be a little bit conservative and bake some conservatism into our assumptions because we simply don't know. We're making an educated guess. So their cash flow is very negative in the beginning, and it slowly improves as their mortgage drops off in 2026, and then the income spigots begin to turn on as their pensions and their Social Security benefits start to come in through the household. But the real risk for John and Jane lies in these early years when they're spending at a really high burn rate. So let's just take a look to see how their assets might hold up, depending on different investment outcomes. So this is a chart showing John and Jane's assets throughout retirement based on various market scenarios. So this is the output that would be provided by a Monte Carlo simulation, and this shouldn't be the only way that you look at it, but I strongly believe that it can offer us incredibly valuable insight to John and Jane's odds of being able to sustain their lifestyle in retirement. Monte Carlo is just some more vernacular, but it's really just a way to capture the uncertainty of the future. So the market doesn't move in a straight line, so by using this form of analysis, you're just essentially adjusting for the uncertainty around market movements year over year. So just to give you an idea of what's going on behind the scenes, this is my own model, so it's separate from the software that you were just looking at. Similar assumptions and so on and so forth, but I just want to give you an idea of what's actually happening, behind the scenes so that you can maybe better understand the concept. So what's happening is the model is running John and Jane's retirement income against their spending over and over again. But instead of assuming the same investment return each year, the model is simply assuming that their investment returns are random, that's based on the statistical properties of their allocations across different types of investments like stocks and bonds. And so by doing this over and over again, you now have a large amount of potential outcomes. Think the law of large numbers that you can use to infer the probability of their money running out at various ages. So what you're looking at in this chart is the distribution of potential outcomes for John and Jane's money. So the yellow line is the bottom 20% of market outcomes, the middle line is the average, the blue line is the top 20%. So the way that I'm thinking about this for John and Jane is that there's a 20% probability that their money will be approaching zero in their mid-90s. Or another way to think about it is that there's an 80% probability that they still have money in their mid-90s. And those are good odds, especially when you consider that all the other assumptions that we're making and just the fact that this assumes that adjustments aren't made as the market situation evolves. All right, let's take a look at it from another angle. So this chart is just the likelihood that they still have money based on various life expectancies. So the right-hand column here, this is the probability that they still have assets at that age. And these two columns here are the likelihood that they will be alive, or one of them will be alive at that age. So let's go down to the mid-80s to the late 90s. As you can see, once they reach the age of 87, both there's a 38% probability that both clients are still living at the age of 87, but there's an 86% probability, so there's a really high probability that at least one of them will still be living, and there's a 97% probability that they'll still have money. And as we move further along, this is just to see kind of their longevity risk. They're age 94 now. There's a 14%, there's a low probability that they'll both be living, but there's a pretty good, there's pretty good odds that at least one of them will be alive. There's a 61% probability, and there's also an 83% probability that they'll still have money if they're, if they're one of them is still living at that time. And so again, remember, this is assuming that there are no adjustments made or changes made if the plan seems like it's taking a turn for the worse. So I mean, if we're the age of 80 and things aren't looking so good when we're doing the same exercise at that point in time, then it's more likely than not that we're going to be making adjustments so that we can improve their odds from that point in time. And so all this model is doing is it's assuming that we don't make any of those adjustments. And so my interpretation of this, working with John and Jane, is that they have pretty good odds based on the assumptions that we're making that they won't run out of money, and I'd feel relatively comfortable with them, retiring at the age of 64 if they're comfortable with the, with the odds that they may need custodial care and that may disrupt the plan. So let's take a look at that next. So let's throw a wrench in John and Jane's plan and assume that John needs custodial care beginning at the age of 85. Let's assume they need $60,000 incremental to what they are normally spending. And so it would typically cost more for custodial care, but since there'd be one single spouse, some of those costs that would be reduced on Jane's end would just be transferred over to the custodial care needs. So not to not get overcomplicated, let's assume that they need $60,000 more for custodial care beginning at John's age 85 and see how this kind of affects their odds. So if we add that scenario in, now their odds of approaching zero towards their late 90s are increasing. And so they may not feel comfortable with this, as they shouldn't, because there's a good chance that one of them will be living in their 90s. And so if this is the case, they might explore working another few years. So I'm just going to assume they work 2 more years to see how that affects their odds. So by working 2 more years, even if one of them needs custodial care, they're still getting money. They're still having money into their early 90s, and the odds of at least one of them being alive then are still pretty high. So I mean, I think that if they are a bit more conservative and they want to really have a high level of confidence that they're never going to run out of money, I think that working an extra 2 years would probably be the course of action, at least another 2 years, and that way they only have 1 year that they don't have Social Security benefits, and their burn rate is really high for that first year. But I do think that it would be prudent. I think that's a smart decision if they do decide to work even just 1 or 2 more years. Each person faced with these decisions is going to view them and think about them differently. We all have our own attitudes and views towards risk. It affects us in different ways. So your decision is always going to come down to just how certain you want to be about your ability to sustain your lifestyle and how well you can self-insure for risks like long-term care. If you feel that you'd benefit from having a complimentary consultation with me, then please feel free to click the link in the description of this video to set up a call. But I hope you get some valuable insight from this video, and I wish you the very best of luck, and I hope to hear from you soon.